Hello, everybody. Welcome. Thank you all for joining today's call. We have got a fun one for you today. So during today's webinar, we're going to discuss the evolution of the SOC, AI's role in security operations, and the importance of keeping humans in the loop while building autonomous systems for security operations teams. My name is Eoin Hinchy. I'm the founder and CEO of Times. We provide a workflow automation platform for mission critical teams to help them build, run, and monitor their most important workflows. Before Times, I spent about 15 years as a cybersecurity practitioner working in technical teams like incident response, SecOps, threat intel, AppSec, full management, those types of teams at companies like eBay, PayPal, and DocuSign. We could not discuss a topic like this without asking our very special friend, Allie Mellen from Forrester, to come join us. Allie is a person with singular knowledge on this topic, and we're really, really excited to welcome you. Allie, how's it going?
It's going great. Thank you so much for having me. I'm thrilled to be here.
Oh, it's our pleasure. Allie, for folks that don't know you, maybe you could give a little introduction to yourself and Forrester.
Happy to. Yeah. So I'm Allie Mellen. I'm a principal analyst on the security and risk team at Forrester. And I cover three things: security operations, so all things having to do with detection and response, nation state threats, and how AI is used in security tools. So nothing very popular right now, nothing very exciting. I have been with Forrester for 4 years now, and really what I spend all of my time doing is researching those topics and then delivering information on that research to our clients, which are typically the Fortune 500. Before joining Forrester, I got my start in computer engineering. I became a hacker and then became a security practitioner. And so I've seen this from multiple different sides, and I'm very excited to have this conversation because I'm a big fan of automation when it's done well and done right.
Amazing. Yeah. And you're also known, Ali, for your spicy takes. So we're hoping for a couple of stingers throughout this webinar. Awesome. Well, thank you again for joining us. Really appreciate it. And I know all our guests are looking forward to learning a little bit more. Okay, so let's get into it. We're going to keep this all killer, no filler. So the agenda for today is we're going to kind of cover a few different things. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to talk about the reality of AI, specifically Gen AI in security operations. We'll talk about the common misconceptions when it comes to AI and some of the real world tangible benefits. Then we'll talk about how AI in security operations centers or SOCs can actually help. We'll talk about whether AI and the evolving role of automation in security means that we need to rethink the SOC and its current setup. We'll then talk about the future of AI in security, and we'll make sure to leave plenty of room for questions as well. So feel free to ask questions in the box. We've got a dedicated team behind the scenes here cataloging them, and we want to hear your hardest possible questions. Okay, so let's get into this. As I said at the start of this call, before Times, I spent 15 years as a security practitioner. And when AI or Gen AI and large language models began to kind of like enter the public consciousness a little over 2 years ago now, we were, and I was personally pretty skeptical about it. You know, we had seen vendors over the course of a couple of decades promise how AI was going to change everything. And they would kind of like promise that it'd be the sun, the moon, and the stars, and then they'd ultimately deliver kind of like a handful of rocks. And so we were kind of like quite skeptical when we started to see this technology and the hype begin to build around it. But once, like a lot of people, once we got our hands on the tools ourselves and we began to experiment and build and apply it to real world situations, we pretty quickly realized that, yes, this is different, right? This felt very, very different. And we kind of came to realize that, yes, this is also the single most important tectonic technology shift of this decade. And we were really excited about it. But we were also like a little bit confused about how it could be used within security teams in a real and meaningful way. And so the acceleration of AI and its adoption within security looks very different depending on who you ask. There's a lot of people that we talk to who are fairly disillusioned by it already. Like, there's a lot of AI demos that overpromise and underdeliver. There's this concept that's never been more true, I don't think, except when it comes to AI, which is demoware, where the product looks really good during a demo, but when it's deployed to the real world, or it's pointed at real enterprise problems, it kind of quickly falls apart. Allie, what do you think? Is this a fair thing to say?
Very much so, unfortunately, because it's so funny that you say that too, because when generative AI first started to become popular and I was hearing about it from CISOs, they were so excited. Everyone was so excited. Like, it's the most excited I've ever seen security practitioners about anything. Yeah. And it just has totally let them down. And so I'm definitely seeing that. I do think that we're seeing a lot of disillusionment with generative AI, but I'm very hopeful that this year in particular is going to be start of some changes in that area. Because, I mean, I believe in the technology. I think it has a ton of potential. I just don't think we're using it to that potential right now.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It's kind of like, we always say in times that there's no silver bullets in security, but when AI came around, we were like, oh, maybe this is the silver bullet. Maybe it's this one. And it was, spoiler alert, we're going to be saying, look, this isn't a silver bullet, but it has the potential to definitely improve everybody's work. Okay, awesome stuff. So I want to kind of like set the scene a little bit and describe the disparity and the dichotomy almost between what industry and vendors are telling us versus what we're seeing in the real world. So what does the industry see and what do vendors see? And one of the things that drives me pretty much insane at the minute is like vendors touting AI as like a weapon for bad guys, and that AI is going to supercharge all these types of attacks. There's a really interesting statistic here, which is that about 17.7% of AI-related security issues in the last decade are just related to genuine AI-specific attacks. And so the vast, vast, vast majority of just AI-related security is things like prompt injection, poor guardrails, etc. And even that is a tiny percentage of the overall attacks that companies are experiencing. And so there's this kind of like snake oil approach, which is like, oh, now that AI exists, attackers are going to start using it to target companies, and you need to buy our firewall or our software in order to protect yourself from it. Allie, you've got an amazing opinion here on what you call the blob. Tell us a little bit about it.
Thank you. Yeah. So the blob is a term, and we're not talking about the movie here for those of you who have seen the blob movie.
Wait,
I have not seen it, so but I like using the graphics from it. So back in the Obama administration, Ben Rhodes, who was President Obama's deputy national security advisor at the time, coined the term the blob to describe what was the American foreign policy establishment. And basically this group of people who was stuck in their own groupthink. Now, we're not talking about that blob here, but what we are talking about is our version of that insecurity, which is a group of people that have created this level of groupthink, which, to be honest, comes up so much around AI in particular, but it happens in a bunch of different areas as well. It's the point where, to be honest, there are many times where I go back to the research and I'm like, I need to just make sure that I'm not missing something, because there are so many voices that are saying this is going to like be a person and we're going to have to deal with it as a human being and it's going to be able to create all of these things. And I'm like, that's not what the technology does. Yeah. But it happens. And when it reaches such a critical mass of the blob, what ends up happening is people get sucked into that thinking and start to think that it's going to be a reality someday when it isn't. And so I'm very careful when having these conversations to make sure that we're pulling people out of that blob and having a better conversation about what's actually happening. Because to your point with this statistic here on the 17.7%, if you look at many of the studies coming out that are even talking about how just generative AI and just LLMs are being used for AI attacks, it's not to say do things like prompt injection of the actual LLM, or even to be using it to create new types of malware, which just isn't happening.
Mhm.
It's just to do things like reconnaissance and to better understand specific topics. It's using it for all the things that we use it for, to be honest, as defenders. It's
Mhm.
just on the other side. And so that reality is very important because it also brings things down to where they're actually at versus saying, oh my God, AI attacks, blah, blah, blah. In reality, the attacks are all very similar to what they were before. Defending them happens in the same way. It doesn't really, even if we were to get to the point where it's like, oh, this is an AI generated attack, it doesn't change anything. It doesn't change the vehicles that they're using to get to your crown jewels or whatever it is they're looking to accomplish.
Awesome. Yeah, I love it. And I think one of the amazing things about security is this kind of like idea of like peer-to-peer networks that people create. And there's these kind of trusted communities of security analysts, security engineers, security leaders who like bounce ideas off each other and will often make buying decisions based on recommendations from those peers. But the other side of that coin then is kind of like, well, if everybody else in my peer network is doing something, I should probably do the same thing versus, hey, maybe I should investigate this a little bit deeper and understand, does it apply to my environment, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, I absolutely love that.
It's so true. And I love that you mentioned that because I do see with the blob, especially a pretty big divide between
Mm.
the practitioners who are actually using the technology and the blob, which tends to be people who they may have never used the technology in their entire careers. They may just be
Sure.
talking to investors or trying to sell it, and they may not be actually putting themselves in the position to use it. And this is not to call out non-technical people or anything like that. I think everybody should be trying to use these tools and to be understanding, if they're going to be in the security industry, what it means to be a security practitioner. And so I think it's very much so worth highlighting that a lot of practitioners understand that it's not going to be the reality, but it does cause them to take time and try to figure it out on their own, even when it's clearly something that we shouldn't even be talking about happening in the
Mhm.
industry.
Yeah, awesome. I love it. Okay, so we would be remiss if we didn't at least address why a lot of the people are on the call today, which is kind of like facing head on some of the misconceptions about AI in security, some of the risks that come from those misconceptions, and also talking about some of the challenges that teams face when they actually adopt this and try and apply it to their security posture. So we're not going to mess around. We're going to get straight into the nitty gritty here. And we're going to talk about like this common misconception we hear, which is that AI will fully replace security analysts. And we're here to say that that is absolutely false. Now, what AI is going to do is it's going to supplement the work that you're already doing. There's a quote that's very well known at this stage, which is that, look, AI isn't going to replace you. Someone using AI to do your job will replace you. And I think that applies here as well. That's the first misconception. The second one then is one I really like, which is that Gen AI benefits entry-level positions most. There's this concept that, hey, you don't need to know how to respond to a security alert, or you don't need to know how to do threat intel enrichment because the AI is going to like walk you through that, or it's going to do it for you automatically. And that's also false. What we have seen ourselves is that AI works best within security operations when it's helping those who have experience already accelerate their jobs. So they know what they want to do, they know the destination, they know the question that they want to answer, and they use AI to help them get that information more quickly. Next one then is that AI provides full environment visibility. Ali, do you want to take this one?
Yeah, definitely. And I love these first two because they're so true and they're such big misconceptions right now, especially with this third one, AI providing full environment visibility. This is going to be one of the most difficult problems. If you think about the value of any type of AI, it's all based around the data that you use to train it on, the data that it understands, right? That's the reason why it's so important for a lot of these LLMs that are telling you, okay, here's what's happening and why. They need to be up to date on the latest information. And if they're not, it's very difficult for them to give you good advice. Now, that is extremely true with security operations as well. But the problem is one of the biggest problems that we have in security operations is it's very difficult to get data all in one place for us to understand. And what we're talking about with AI and AI being able to understand the entire environment would be having to get all that data in one place so that you can train the AI on it. Not only is it technically very difficult because we have an issue with this in the sim as it is, but it's also very difficult from the standpoint of it's expensive. Even if you are equipped to do that, you know how much it costs to be able to do something like that. Now, when we think about the implementation that this could take, if we did want to do it, there are two ways, right? There's the way that we just talked about, which is, hey, let's get all the data in one place and continuously train AI on it. Not only expensive to put that data in one place, very expensive to continuously train the AI on it. And of course, just difficult technically to get all that data in one place. There's the other option, which is a little bit more realistic, but still has a lot of problems, which is, okay, let's not train it on everything. Instead, let's use it as the interface to all the other technologies. So you can ask questions of the LLM, and it's going to go out through integrations with other technologies and say, okay, your vulnerability management tool, give me information on what vulnerabilities exist in the environment. Your EDR, give me information on whether or not these vulnerabilities have been targeted by something. That sounds great. But the other big problem in security is the fact that security tools do not work together. It is very difficult to get security tools to work together and to do it continuously. And so if you're expecting to get full visibility of your environment with this LLM, it's not going to be possible until we solve one of these two challenges, both of which are extremely, extremely difficult to solve. And even if you do, there are likely to be some edge cases that you won't see. And so you can rely on best case scenario, the AI saying, I don't have full visibility of this. But in reality, it's probably just going to give you the wrong answer and you're not going to know the difference. So there's a lot of technical challenges and monetary challenges that prevent this from being possible. And I also want to push back on the idea that we would want it to be possible. Because one of the things that I see is, okay, it's great. We can ask a chatbot information about what vulnerabilities exist in the environment. Is that the best way to get that information? Why do we want to get that information through a chatbot? Why wouldn't we prefer to get it through a dashboard that's built to show us that information? Now, whether or not the tools currently do that is a different conversation entirely, but there is a reason that the entire internet isn't just pages and pages and pages of paragraphs of text. And it's because it's not the easiest way for humans to interpret information. And so a chatbot, which is just going to give you paragraphs of text, may not be either.
Oh, that was such an incredible answer, Ali. I there's so much I want to dig in there, but I think that one point I want to double click on is this idea of I guess it's the reason we're hearing from customers about why they're not using AI more. You know, when we talk to our customers and they talk about how little they're using AI and LLMs in their environment, regardless of the use case, the number one thing that comes up repeatedly is exactly what you mentioned there, which is these models just don't have access to my real-time and proprietary information. And that is what I need to make my decisions for my business, especially in security. And I don't have the time, the resources, or the economics to go and transfer all that information. So really, really good stuff. Final misconception, and you touched on this already, Ali, so I might let you continue your diatribe here against chatbots, which is that like chatbots are a great place to start with Gen AI use cases in the SOC.
Yes, we did start to touch on that already because I can't help these conversations just immediately going for it. But as we just talked about, it's fine to use a chatbot for a lot of use cases. For example, I love to just ask it questions to kind of bounce off of it for ideas. But that is because that is a part of the workflow. Like I might just go to a person to bounce ideas off of. And now I'm also doing that with AI. That is not part of the workflow within security operations. Within security operations, there's a very structured workflow, hopefully, that you have built around your SOAR or your SIM or your EDR, where you go in, you look at the alert, you go through the details about the alert, you do the investigation, you do the response, etc. Right? And going to another tab with yet another chatbot that you can talk to in yet another way is not a part of that workflow. And now I have even better news, because every single tool that you're using in security now has a chatbot. So you get to interact with a lot of different chatbots. It's like everybody gets a chatbot. This is not the most effective way for us to be interfacing with information. And we've seen evidence of that. Like most of the conversations that we have, practitioners are like, yeah, we don't use that. We even hear that from many of the vendors. It's like, this isn't very useful. There is one exception, which I find very funny, which is Gen Z. Gen Z is actually more willing to go and use the chatbot, which I think is kind of neat and makes sense because in many ways, that's what they're learning on.
Yeah.
But I also question as to if that is a symptom of being new to the field and wanting to get questions answered about the tools and about the ways that they should be approaching things, and basically having a question and going and looking for the answer through the generative AI tool.
I love it. Yeah. Well, as a Gen Z person myself, no, I'm clearly kidding. One of the things you mentioned there, I think, is like it's so damning. In fact, this concept that like we're heading towards a world potentially where we worked for a decade to break down all the silos, or tried to break down all the silos between all our various technologies with things like automation and SIMs and dashboards. And now we're kind of like starting to advocate for a world, or at least some vendors are starting to advocate for a world where we have like now got these individual siloed copilots across our stacks. And if you're a CISO or like a CIO, that must be so depressing to be like, look, what am I going to do here? This vendor sell me their copilot. This vendor send me their copilot. They don't talk. What's the answer? So it's a great point. And I again, to your point, I don't necessarily think there's like a completely easy answer here until we have, again, some universal layer that sits on top of all these copilots or something. Amazing. Okay, so we talked about some of the misconceptions. We talked about some of the risks. There's another side of the coin here as well, which is that when we think about the benefits of AI, we kind of have to take a step back and look where SOC analysts spend most of their time today. So, Allie, this goes to your point, which was, it's just not in the workflow. Applying AI to something that's already a broken process or a broken workflow isn't necessarily going to make it work any better. So potentially what we need to do is we need to look at how are SOC analysts spending their time today and understand, look, can AI be applied to that problem to make it less cumbersome, onerous, etc.? Or is there just some other processes that we need to do? And trying to avoid everything looking like a nail because we've got a brand new AI hammer. And so when we talk to SOC analysts and we do research across SOC analysts, where we hear about them spending their time is on three things. One is on repetitive response actions. So this is things like, I need to look up an IP address or quarantine a device or change a security group on a firewall. The second is taking action based on the volume and type of alerts. So if you're receiving 10,000 alerts a day, there's got to be a way that we can apply automation and AI to that to look for clustering, look for duplicates, et cetera, et cetera. And so that's where we're seeing a lot of analysts spend their time, along with things like reporting and dashboarding and investigation, et cetera. So where we're hearing from our customers, the most effective uses for AI today is in areas like SOAR, right? So you apply GenAI to SOAR, which is security orchestration, automation, and response. And in this world, AI can supplement SOAR by automating the tedious parts of your investigative workflows. So looking up IP addresses, doing log sweeps across your SIM, finding out what assets are owned by what individuals, all that kind of work, which can really stack up, as you guys know. And so you can use AI for that, but you can also then use it to help you like write reports or summarize case notes, that type of work. Does that make sense, Allie, in your experience?
Oh, yes. I find this so interesting because one of the things that we've heard a lot about, especially early on, is like, prompt books. We're going to have these books that are just going to have so many different prompts all put together. I don't think that that's going to be a great use case in security because we already have playbooks. And playbooks already have the steps of actions that we want to do during an incident that we want to automate. And so it makes a lot more sense to me to say, okay, let's take those set of steps and those set of actions and add in specific prompts that we want to reach out to the LLM to do. And in that way, we can combine what's happening on the automation front with what's happening on the generative AI front into something that will fit more seamlessly into the analyst workflow. We don't really need prompt books. We just need playbooks that can integrate prompts into them and call out to the right tools to do so.
I love that. So and that kind of gives you like a bit of an on-ramp into AI in your environment as well, right? Because if you already have a playbook or you already have a concept of how you're doing it, you can just plug AI into the part that makes the most sense rather than trying to like recreate the whole process with AI.
Exactly. We don't need to use AI for everything. We have tools that are effective at what they're doing. We just need to use it in the right ways, to your point earlier about everything being a nail and you're the hammer. I think especially if we look at like the reporting example, that is such a fast win for practitioners to just be able to say, okay, write that report. That's an easy prompt that you can execute on. That isn't going to be something that's going to be a ton of work, but it's going to take a ton of work away from you and your team because those reports take so long to write.
That is gloriously common sense right there, Allie. I love it. Amazing.
It's
Okay.
not exciting, but
yeah.
it's
not
going
to sell like $10 million of software overnight, but it's the
It's going to save a
reality,
lot
right?
of time.
Exactly. And I think that's what security practitioners are crying out for, honestly, is like, what's the reality of this situation? Is it going to change my world, or is it just going to help me do my job a little bit better? And there's advantages to that, right? Like, it's not necessarily a bad thing.
Definitely.
Okay, so I mentioned this already, but like one of the ways that you can use AI specifically in the SOC for to really speed up your workflows is around threat intel and detection. And so this is both applies for Gen AI, but also just kind of like your pre-LLM machine learning style use cases like clustering, anomaly detection, etc. And so looking for things like, hey, did this user log in from on a Saturday morning that's completely out of their normal behavior, et cetera, et cetera. Like kind of the promise of user entity behavior analysis that we were promised kind of like 5-6 years ago. With LLMs, that reality can be applied to our environments a little bit more seamlessly. And then the next one, which I think makes a ton of sense as well, is around predicting the exploitability of vulnerabilities. And so the concept here, Allie, as far as I understand it, is that because LLM can be trained on attack vectors, right? So it can understand the static nature of what an SQL vulnerability is. It can understand the nature of like a cross-site scripting or broken credential management, et cetera, et cetera. You can then use that knowledge of the LLM to essentially apply it to a long list of vulnerabilities in your environment. And so it can have all the details of all the CVEs, and then it can be applied to your environment, which just makes a ton of sense to me as well.
Definitely. I think that especially on the vulnerability side, there's a lot of interesting work that can be done, kind of combining some of the more traditional ways that we've looked at trying to rank vulnerabilities and prioritize them, while also providing things like there's a couple of vendors that do some automation of the creation of patches and being able to apply those really easily. That's
Nice.
a great use case for generative AI, where it's like, you don't need to put a ton of work into this, but you need to know exactly what it needs to do. The generative AI can take care of that for you. You validate it and you deploy it. So a lot simpler to be able to take some of these actions. That's especially on the product side, but from an infrastructure perspective, there are gains there as well.
Yeah, and even just the ability to be able to ask the LLM or have the LLM check, does this vulnerability exist in my environment, right? Hey, am I using a Java Spring version 3.1 anywhere in my environment? No, I'm not. Okay, cool. I'm just going to close that without having to investigate it whatsoever. Awesome. And then finally, this is one that I think we're going to hear more and more about as these LLMs become clever and clever. And that's using AI to potentially suggest next steps in an investigation or an incident response, and having it suggest what remediation might be. But the critical thing here is for a long time, we're still going to need humans in the loop here to ensure accuracy.
Yeah, I have such a love-hate relationship with this one because I do like the idea of providing better recommendations, but they're not very good right now. Some of the recommendations are really bad, like block Excel across the enterprise, kind of bad, which is just not an action that anyone should ever take. But if it was something simpler, like block macros across the environment, someone new might take that action. Now, as these get better, I do think it's going to be really valuable, especially for practitioners that have a lot of experience. They're like, I know exactly what to do in this, and AI has just set it up for me where I can just press go and it'll take care of it. That's the ideal state, is to get to that point where there's some level of review, but at the end of the day, you do a lot less of the work required. The only other challenge that I see here is something that we talked about a little bit earlier, which is that business context. A lot of the generative AI implementations that we've seen are useful for a general audience, but once you get to something specific, like we follow these exact incident response processes, why isn't generative AI aligning to that? It becomes a bit of an issue. And so we need advancements from the standpoint of the business context that you can bring in to make sure that the AI-powered recommendations are actually ones that are accurate for your use case.
Oh, it's so true. One of the ones I saw just this week, in fact, was like AI recommending like a IP address block against 8.8.8.8, like Google's DNS, which would have like, and it was like, it was that concept of like, it was so confident that this was the thing to do. It was like, yep, here's what you should do. I would recommend you block this entire DNS server.
It is very overly confident. It's so interesting. This is not at all related to security and very anecdotal, but I still can't believe it. So over the holiday break, I was doing some trivia with my family, and
Cool.
I asked ChatGPT to come up with my trivia questions for me, and it was all supposed to be snow related. And so the first
Core use
one it
case,
came
core case.
seemingly an easy use case, right? I would
Yeah.
hope that I get it wrong. But the first answer it came up with was, hey, ask them where the largest snowball fight in the world was held. And the answer was in Canada. And I
Okay.
was like, that's an awesome one. That's so fun. And then I had to come up with a couple of different answers. It kept giving me trivia about Canada. And so I was like, just stop with the Canada. Give me something else. And so it gave me a few more. And then I ended it with, okay, just give me one more and then I'll be done. And the last question and answer it gave was, where was the largest snowball fight in the world? And it said Washington. And I was like, are you sure about that? Because just earlier you said Canada. And the right answer is Canada for anybody who's doing trivia. But I think it's a good example where it's not always going to give you the right answer. And even on very basic stuff, it is still not giving you the right answer.
Yeah. Well, I'm sorry you had to spend your holidays being gaslit by ChatGPT. That is not how anybody wants to spend their Christmas break. Good to know. And now we all know where the largest snowball fight ever was. Amazing. Okay.
Very cool.
Perfect stuff. All right. So we started this webinar, and the whole topic of this webinar is about like the SOC, and will the SOC become autonomous? That's the kind of question that we're answering. We're kind of rejecting the question in its primal form here in some ways, because as you guys I'm sure have heard, there's this famous quote which is misattributed to Henry Ford, which is, if I'd asked people what they want, they would have said faster horses. And I kind of feel that's what the autonomous SOC is. Instead of taking a big step back and asking, is the SOC fit for purpose? Is this L1, L2, three-tier approach in this world that we're living in with the diversity of attacks that we're dealing with? Is that the right approach, rather than just trying to like plaster over the cracks with AI? Ali, you'll probably remember this, but about when I was a security practitioner, there was this vendor, I won't mention the vendor, but one of the things they would do was, if you had an incident, you could call up the vendor and they would drive like a big semi truck to your office and like park in your parking lot. And it was like this mobile SOC. And I remember thinking like, that is the dumbest thing that I've like ever seen or heard in my life. And it was like full of pew maps and everything. And so as a result, I've always had a little bit of a a little bit of a love-hate relationship of like your traditional SOC. Like I've never really felt that it was fit for purpose, and it was kind of a bit of a hangover from like the network operations center. And what we hear from kind of like our customers is that those folks with 3-tier SOCs, L1 analysts, kind of get stuck in those roles, right? They're dealing with repetitive alert triage. They rarely get to see the full incident end to end. So they're missing out on learning opportunities, and there's not a whole lot of job satisfaction in there. And then, of course, it's leading to burnout and churn and low career progression, et cetera, et cetera. As it exists today, do you think that the traditional SOC is too rigid? Is it too costly? Does it make sense outside of large enterprises? Would love your thoughts.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think it's way too rigid, unfortunately. And you're 100% right. Like when we look at security as a whole, where do we find the most talent entering the security organization? It's the security analysts. It's the L1 analysts. And we are putting them through the ringer and expecting them to come out the other side and actually want to continue in this field. They're not going to want to do that. I mean, the analysts that we've interviewed throughout the years for some of the research that I've done have said very interesting things about what it's like working as an analyst. I kind of had this premise going into a lot of this research that it sucked to be a security analyst, because I worked with a CISO for a long time who said being a security analyst is the worst job in the world. And my first experience with a SIM, I was like, I don't know if this field is for me. This is not a fun thing to be working in. There's a lot to not like, and that's been the predominant feedback that we get, especially in traditional SOC models, is you spend all of your time working on extremely tedious, sometimes very stressful situations. You never see the end of them because you always just triage and pass it off to the L2 or the L3. So you never get the job satisfaction of actually closing the ticket. And you are also obviously dealing with a lot of false positives. You go through a ton of alerts that end up being nothing. And you are expected to get to the next level by earning a certification. But the problem is you have no time at work to earn that certification. And so most of the analysts that I see spend a lot of time outside of work hours building towards the next steps in their career, spend a lot of time taking classes that they have to pay for and doing certifications that they have to pay for to get to that next step. And to me, that shows that we're not helping to develop our talent and that we're relying on them to want to be in this field themselves. And there are a lot of people that do want to be in this field, but it's very difficult to even get the right people for that task because we're also expecting them to have some level of experience. So there's a lot going wrong in the existing model.
Yeah, I love it. So one of the things that we believe in at times anyway is this idea of the modern SOC versus what we call modern SecOps. And so the approach for the modern SOC is, to your point, just like the same processes, the same thing, just a little bit faster with technology, whether that's like new tools, automation, or in this world, like agentic AI. And so whether you have 50 analysts or 100 analysts or 1,000 analysts, the fundamental problem is still the same, right? Their analysts are still bored. They're still burning out. It's just more and more of the same stuff. And so our view is this view that there's a better approach called modern SecOps. And essentially, modern SecOps is the idea that security evolves from being, a bunch of random processes into becoming a set of principles and approaches, not dictated by the team structure or size. So it's a more proactive model that's kind of focused on understanding the threats at scale. And we also then try and shift the incentive. Instead of you having alerts, and then they never deal with the outputs of those alerts because it lands on some L1 SOC team, you're changing that whole approach. And so it's no longer oriented around a queue of alerts, but it's more focused on the kind of the proactive investigation and research and better understanding of the adversaries and their approach. And that means that it becomes less about solving these individual issues, but again, understanding and being able to remediate threats and vulnerabilities at scale.
Yeah, I like that. I think For us at Forrester, the way that we approach this is through this mindset of detection engineering. And it's 100% to your point, moving away from the ticket closing and instead focusing more on the quality of detections that you're building and the quality of response workflows that you're building, and doing it in an iterative fashion. One of the biggest problems is we are a group of people that need to be working in iterative fashion that have spent the past 20 years working with a waterfall methodology. And it has totally prevented us from being able to move faster, iterate more quickly, make sure that we're changing detections over time, make sure we're not sitting with a detection for 5 years and never actually updating it. And the same thing with response workflows. I mean, this is one of the biggest problems that we see when it comes to adopting SOAR within our client base is there are a lot of teams that don't know what they want to automate, but they think that they can just get an automation tool and it'll be fixed. The reality is you need to have these processes in place to be able to make the gains that you want with the technology. Another big part of that is, to your point, one of the things that we strongly advocate for is breaking down the L1, L2, L3 structure and having every single analyst take an alert from start to finish. There are growing pains to it, but what we see is at the end of the day, it means that every analyst is going to be on the bench of people that can handle an incident when there is something really bad happening. And it also helps them get up to speed so much faster and to be able to really understand the depth of the field so much better. So it's a scary leap to take, but when you do, the gains are huge, especially for making sure that your staff feel like they are getting to the next point in their career and that you have a support network of analysts that can handle incidents more effectively.
Phenomenal. And it's so encouraging to me to hear that like an organization of the scale and influence of Forrester is advocating for that approach, because from my experience as a practitioner, it is life-changing. And our customers that we see who are in the kind of like the traditional tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 versus the folks that are in that kind of more detection engineering and a flat team of like response engineers, their ability to execute effectively and efficiency is just like orders of magnitude more different. Okay, and so this idea of modern SecOps moves away from the concept of like a centralized SOC, some truck metaphorically in your parking lot full of pew pew maps, and encourages like more specialization. So one of the things that I felt a lot when I was a security practitioner was that I knew a little bit about everything, but I was a master of none. So I could tell you a little bit about cloud, a little bit about endpoint, a little bit about email, all these various things. But as the breadth of our industry increases, specialization is becoming more and more important. And so modern SecOps approach allows you to really become that master of certain areas. And it also aligns better with how adversaries think, right? Because you can have an adversary who's just focused on like phishing emails. You can have an adversary who's really focused on application vulnerabilities, etc.
Yeah, I like that. I think it makes total sense. And one of the things that we see with the collapsed model, especially if you have the analysts working on building detections, building response playbooks, is one of the ways that they get to the point where they know how to change the detections that exist or change the response playbooks that exist is because you're giving them the space to go out there and say, okay, you want to look at threat research, go look at threat research and see what new detection and linked response playbook you could build from that. You're interested in data science and how data science impacts security, go look at, from a data science perspective, exactly what we should be doing better, or go look at our cloud environment and see what detections you could build there. And so it enables from the start that specialization to take hold in a more rapid way.
Beautiful answer. All right. Okay, so we're getting to kind of like the wrap-up stage here, folks. So bear with us. We've got a bunch of questions coming in as well. So keep them coming. Thank you so much. So this idea of moving from like a SOC, your traditional SOC, to a collapsed modern SecOps approach, AI and automation, how are they going to enable this shift? And so from our point of view, the way this will work is that AI and automation are going to be used to support analysts rather than replace them, right? So they'll be automating the repetitive processes to free analysts up to focus on those deeper investigations, to allow them to spend more time writing detections in the areas that they want to specialize in. And it allows junior analysts shifting from this kind of like standard alert triage to more proactive threat hunting, to kind of like building hypotheses around threat models and so on, and then really kind of exploring that, helping them build their knowledge of their environment, but also of the security industry as a whole. So SOC analysts essentially transition into detection engineers. And when analysts get frustrated with repetitive alerts, they often find themselves saying, you know what, I'm just going to automate this. And they have the ability then to go be able to do it. And AI can help security teams optimize and improve those workflows, whether it's using Allie's recommendation, which is kind of, hey, like take the workflows that you already have and figure out where you can begin to include AI in that approach, rather than just allowing you to kind of like machine gun alerts away a little bit faster.
Yes, definitely. I completely agree. And I think the thing that I hope people take away from this more than anything is that this is about shifting the focus away from just closing the alert into making the detections better, making the response playbooks that are tied to those detections better. If you can make that transition in thought and in focus, it's going to help so much, because the focus cannot be on closing the alerts, or the alerts are never going to improve and you're never going to get less of them. And AI and automation are the fundamental parts of that. And it's also where you can start actually using AI in interesting ways and identifying places to use it more. I mean, one of the cool things of having the analysts working on these detection and response playbooks is you can say to them, are there interesting places where you can insert a prompt into this response workflow? Can we add to a response playbook the reporting example, or some way to easily synthesize this if this alert has gotten to the point where a summary needs to go to the CISO or the VP of security operations? Like, there's a lot of different things that you can play with that enable you to take back control of building the AI capabilities, instead of just relying on the vendors to build it in a way that makes sense. Because to be honest, we just haven't seen the vendors do that. So you can take back that control and actually build it in the ways that you think are the most important.
Great answer. Okay, so the other way that we see this having an impact, and we talked about this a little bit, is AI is a copilot, not a replacement. And so the idea here is, again, we're using the technology to speed up and shift away from the approach that we've used for a while, and that may not be working, that's causing burnout, that's leading to churn, et cetera, et cetera. So AI can improve efficiency, but it's not going to fully automate security operations in our lifetime, at least. And as two Gen Z people, hopefully we'll be living for like a long time to come, Allie. And so one of the great things about security, and one of the things that I've always really enjoyed about this, is that it's a human versus human challenge, right? The coolest thing is that you get to work in security, like fighting bad guys. You know, you're defending against real world attackers. And that's not going to change with AI or agentic AI or the autonomous SOC, whatever you want to call it. It's going to be attackers that allow us to kind of adapt our approach around like the constraints, and AI alone won't stop them changing those constraints.
Totally agree. I think that the other thing here just worth considering is, like, when I was a computer engineer, I would develop a lot of software, right? And every single piece of software, when you start developing it, it doesn't matter if it's AI or not, you always develop it with a set of constraints. There are constraints as to the inputs, there are constraints as to the outputs, there's constraints around the data that, say, an AI model is being trained on. From firsthand experience, I can tell you that that applies even to AI agents. I've made one. It wasn't impressive, but it exists. And so from a computer engineering perspective, any of the software that we're building, it has constraints. And that would include any type of autonomous SOC capability. And hackers, again, from experience, love finding ways around that. That's the whole point of doing a cyber attack, is to find a way around the existing controls that are in place, the way that things are supposed to work, and find the way that they don't work, or that they work a little bit differently. And so as long as we are building software with constraints, which will be forever, because you always have to define those constraints, attackers are going to be able to find their own way around them. And coming back to your point about the people aspect of this, we need to innovate and be thinking and be creative enough to come up with ways to defend against the little edge cases that the hackers are finding. The only way to do that is through human interaction.
I love it. So ultimately, we're saying AI should be used to help analysts augment, empower them, and evolve their role rather than trying to eliminate it in any fashion.
Definitely. This is one of those fields. I mean, we have a lot of research at Forrester and other fields about how this is going to change the jobs and potentially, unfortunately, take away some jobs. Security operations is not one of them.
Well said. We should have finished it there, Ali. We got another slide and questions to go. Okay, awesome. So we've got 3 ways that we think that AI is going to be an analyst multiplayer. So we'll move quickly through these because there are a bunch of questions coming in. So the first is that AI will not create an autonomous SOC, but it will significantly enhance efficiency. And this is exactly what we're saying. Even if we could trust it to respond to alerts and take action on our behalf, the technology is not close to being accurate enough for these mission critical workflows today. And so it needs to be used as a tool with oversight. The second one then is that the biggest wins will come from AI improving workflows, not replacing human expertise. So again, Ali, you said this really distinctly and articulately in that you add AI to your workflows to enhance them, to improve them, to make them more intelligent and accurate, not to kind of like use AI as a panacea for your security operations. And then finally, organizations will adapt AI thoughtfully, balancing automation with human oversight. And the folks that do that will gain significant security advantages. I love this one because I think it's so true. You know, we talked about AI and silver bullets in general. Again, sorry, folks, there's no silver bullets in security, but AI is going to be, when applied correctly, it's going to significantly improve our advantages to detect, respond, and remediate attacks.
Love it. Couldn't have said it better myself.
Awesome stuff. So, Ali, we had a bunch of questions come in. I want to ask the first one, though, because it's something I'm being greedy. It's something you mentioned earlier on about this idea of the collapsed tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 SOC being so much more impactful than your traditional SOC. For folks on the call today who may be an L1 analyst or an L2 analyst, would you have like tips or recommendations that they can apply to help their organization embrace that change? Or, you know, how could they approach those conversations with their leadership?
That's a really great question. They're in a very difficult spot because of just how the team works. And I do think that the best way to approach this, especially if you're an L1 analyst and you're trying to get the leadership to make a change, is to start evangelizing and talking about the benefits and also start showing the benefits. Because if there's one thing that you can do that's really effective, it's to start asking questions of the L2s and the L3s, start to kind of model the behavior that you would prefer to see in the organization. So for example, one of the things that's required if you want to move this to this type of model is to have your L2s and L3s or your more experienced personnel mentoring the newer personnel and helping them take an incident from start to finish. And so if you're an L1, you're joining a team, you want to try to get up to speed as quickly as possible, get ahead in your career, but also help them move to this type of model. The best way to do so is to start looking for mentors and start saying, hey, I want to be going to the next level in this, and I'd love for you to help me get there. And your example of leadership in that area, your example of success in that area is going to be a point of pride for the team that you can then use to say, we should instill this throughout the entire organization so that we can have this deeper bench. I think the other part of it is once you get to that point of showcasing that it works, to start talking about the value that it's going to bring to leadership, which is entirely based around the elements of making sure that you have enough people that if your star performer leaves, there are other people who can come up and start addressing those incidents completely. Because that's one of the biggest things that we see as a motivator for many teams switching to this model is they're not well staffed. They have maybe 3 SOC analysts. One SOC analyst is extremely good, like a huge veteran in the field. And eventually they're going to get a better deal and go somewhere else. And it's going to leave the team in a very difficult spot where the other 2 have to pick up the slack. And so making sure that you have the bench of people who can pick up that slack immediately is really important. And the existing models are not built to do that.
I love it. So like as well as all the other benefits, you get kind of succession planning built in for free,
Exactly.
essentially. I love
Yeah,
it.
and
Okay.
that's really what's going to be most important to leadership too. Unfortunately, like we can talk all we want about trying to make sure that the talent gets the skills that they need, but at the end of the day, leadership wants to make sure that the ship continues the way that it needs to go first and foremost.
Great answer. Okay, so another one that's really interesting here, I'm going to kind of cherry pick these, is how do you feel generally about using Gen AI for critical things? Writing reports is fine, but using it to lead an investigation and find evidence could lead to false negatives or false positives. Question mark.
Yes, definitely. I think it will, and is the thing, especially right now. There's a couple of things that are important here. First, always validate the output that it gives you. I cannot stress this enough. If you are using it for things like doing any aspects of investigation, you need to validate that it's accurate because it's not going to always be accurate. And that requires having someone more experience using it. The other aspect of that that's important is to treat it as something that is helpful but and informative, but not the end all be all. That is so insanely important here. And I realize it's easy to slip into, oh, this very natural answer came back, I'm going to trust it, but not trusting it thoroughly is important. And then the last thing is, and this is something that I'm going to be writing about a lot this year, we have not at all, which is unbelievable to me, touched on in the past several years efficacy of these models and efficacy of the output that they're providing. When I ask most security vendors what the efficacy of the output of the model that they're delivering to practitioners today is, they say, well, we rely on the up or the down from the user to make a decision as to whether or not it's actually a good output. It's wild to me that they do this because they're also marketing it to newer practitioners. And so they're relying on newer practitioners to know whether it's a good or a bad answer, which is then being used to train the model more. And so the thing that I would recommend is to push your vendors on how they determine the efficacy of the output, both from the standpoint of, is it the right answer? But also to our conversation earlier, is it the business use case specific answer that we need? Because those two things, first off, you're going to get very different answers. But second, there are certain vendors that are prioritizing efficacy, and that is really, really helpful for you to understand how these things work.
Yeah, that's such a great answer, and it was a really good question. I think for me, there's very few things that are like as black and white as this when it comes to like AI. And to me, it's just like you today with the technology, you cannot just use an LLM for a mission critical workflow because by their very nature, they're non-deterministic, right? And so you can't predict how it's going to be performing. And with security, the way you build trust is understanding how it's going to perform, what it's going to do, etc. So you just can't trust them to do it. And so to me, the best answer we have today is taking these LLMs and combining them with some kind of ability to take deterministic action. And whether that's like a script or whether that's a no-code workflow like we do in Tines, you have to be able to have like transparent understanding of the accuracy of the action that's being performed. Okay, so I think we probably have room for one more question. Let's go with this one. So do you believe it's real to have a 24/7 SOC analyst shift without L1 to L3 structure? Is it economically feasible? And so we're advocating for this collapse structure between, without having this kind of like L1, L2, L3. This person obviously works in a 24/7 SOC. What's the compromise?
So not only would I say it's economically feasible, it's actually more economically feasible than an L1, L2, L3. So the research that I've done on this has been from multiple sides. So it has been from MSSPs and MDR providers that are using this model today, and it's more cost effective for them than the traditional SOC model has ever been. And it is also from the enterprise standpoint, and enterprises that I know are using this model actively and finding that it is extremely helpful, especially around retaining their talent and making sure that they have that bench. So that's the first thing, is that I don't just believe that it's real to have this be economically feasible. I know that it is because there are a lot of teams that are actually doing this. The second thing that I'd say is, while it is difficult, it is more important to do it this way, because at the end of the day, you're going to want more people that can take the actions that you need than just having one that is incredibly high paid that sits on the top of things. And when they leave, the entire structure falls down. And so a big part of this is in changing the way that we think about the talent management within the organization and the training that we're giving them, so that we can have more people operating immediately out of the gate, even as the earliest in their careers, doing the activities that we need them to do to make sure that we're closing more alerts. So it comes with its challenges, like everything. This is not another silver bullet or another panacea, but there is a way to do this. And we go into a lot more depth in some of the research that we do.
Amazing. Allie, that was phenomenal. Thank you so much. We are right at time. Everybody, thank you so much for joining us. This was recorded, and so you will have a link to the recording tomorrow. We'll also share links to some of the research that we shared throughout the presentation, so we'll have that. Allie, thank you so much again for joining us. Where can people find you if they want to reach out and say hi?
Thank you so much for having me. This has been so great. I am on LinkedIn. I'm on Blue Sky. I'm still on X for some reason. And of course, the Forrester website has my blog where I publish as much of the research publicly as I can get away with. So thank you again for having me. This was so fun.
Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.